The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Café. This is the United Podcast Network.
Want to shake up your small business marketing? I mean, really shake it up.
Studio 21 Podcast Café.
Have you been thinking about doing your own podcast?
Studio 21 Podcast Café.
Would you like to take your business to the next level?
Studio 21 Podcast Café.
This is the golden age of podcasting, and it's time to stop thinking and start doing.
Studio 21 Podcast Café.
Get your message heard 24/7, 365, over and over again.
Studio 21 Podcast Café.
Welcome to the 21st century.
Welcome to the Studio 21 Podcast Café.
Here's the creator and host of the Studio 21 Podcast Café, David Garofalo.
Welcome, everybody, to the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is a 21-minute or less weekly podcast to help you get your message out, grow your business, and build your bottom line. Make more profit from your podcast and your overall business. Let me help bring your marketing and advertising into the 21st century. My name is David Garofalo. I've been doing podcasting since 2010. I created a six-figure income just from the podcast. This is a 21-minute podcast, so let's start the clock. And here we go. Today we're talking about teasing. Most successful programs know that writing teases, and I can see your eyes rolling back already. I can hear them, maybe even a groan or two. But you know, teasing is essential and always a part of a compelling newscast and a podcast. But most podcasters don't do them. It's not selling out. It's selling them back. It's bringing them back. Teasers has less to do with the content of your podcast and more in common with TV commercials. It's selling them back. Podcasters who aren't properly trained and aren't very good at teasers, we're going to teach that today with a few basic tips for listeners who can actually look forward to this part of the show, of your weekly show. So I'm telling you that you're thinking of part of the teasing is a terrible thing. If you're doing it right and properly, I promise you that the listeners are going to be looking forward to you putting the tease in there and then forward to come on and see what that tease is all about. It's a psychological thing that happens within people. Teasers are what TV news anchors say to convince viewers to watch the newscast or continue watching. It happens in sitcoms, it happens in TV shows, it happens in newscasts a lot, and it happens in some podcasts. They typically come in some sort of headline before the newscast begins and at the end of each segment of the news, because they're going to bring you back from the commercial content also. They're going to bring you onto the show. They're going to bring you back on each and every time they go to commercial break. So here's an example of a tease before a newscast. Next on Channel 21 Action News, why the governor says he's not afraid to raise your taxes. You're going to maybe tune in, right?
I think so.
A cat faces death in downtown building but meows her way to safety. News at 11. If you're interested in cats, you're going to tune in. What's that all about? It's a story. It's a real story. And that's the way you're going to actually word it in order to bring the person in. Could a snowstorm be brewing in the north that could affect your weekend? We'll tell you about that when we come back.
Now, is there a danger to throwing a tease out and you have nothing, right?
Yes.
Because like on that one, if now I tune in and he said, nope, no snowstorm.
No, that's a bad thing to do. And you pull that once or twice, you're going to lose the listener and they're less interested. There's got to be a truth. Is there a storm brewing?
There better be one.
And you notice that I said your weekend plans.
Right.
It's going to affect your weekend plans because that's what they need to care about. You're talking to them. Yeah. So it's going to affect them. There's a storm brewing here in the Northeast that's going to affect my weekend. I'm going to tell you about that. I don't care so much.
Right.
Well, this is going to affect your weekend plans. So, even if you're not from the Northeast, there's a storm brewing in the Northeast that could be affecting your weekend plans. Well, geez, I'm down in Florida. That could affect my weekend plans? It could. Yep. When we get to there and we tell you this is a northeaster, it's going northeast or whatever, and it could affect you. Anyway, Could drinking beer be the answer to a longer life? Channel 21 News is next. If you're a beer drinker, maybe you're going to hang on. You were just ready to flick that channel. And could beer drinking be the answer to a longer life? Hey, I'm interested in this. This has to do with me.
And it could be something you can bring back to your wife and say, hey, it's not a problem
There we
with me
go.
drinking beer.
The tease is trying to bring you back, keep you listening, hanging on. That's what it's trying to do, or bringing you on in the first place. Are you ending your podcast or segment that way? And the answer to most podcasts is no, they're not. And they feel like they're selling out if they do that. It's not. Do this and bring them back. You could and might keep them coming back or turning in to your show for the first time because you're doing this. Still to come on this podcast, he's 105 years old, and he's the newest podcaster on the United Podcast Network. You'll meet him and see why he feels it's now or never.
Yeah, I'm waiting to see what's going on with that.
105-year-old guy starting a podcast. You understand why it's now or never. Never. He's 105 years old. But who is this guy? What's the podcast all about? Maybe you're interested enough to hang on or to tune in the first place. This is important stuff to do each and every podcast, each and every break. And if you do this, I think you're going to have fun with it. Plus, don't miss this incredible audio of a man who survived 48-hour podcast marathon without any sleep, but for a great cause. More of this when we come up in a few minutes, right? We do this on every one of our breaks that we come on to, something to teach you to do it. On this show, we're pulling back the curtain and showing you what we're doing to try to keep you coming on, but trying to help you learn this to do on your podcast.
And, I mean, that's a good one. There's a couple hooks in there, you know, the 48-hour marathon, but then also, well, what's the great cause?
Right.
So I think it's nice if there's a couple hooks in, you get different people.
Yep. So look at your stories that you're going to be talking about on your show and find out which is the one that would be good to do the tease the previous week while you're teasing the show during the week. What is the right one to end up doing there? Get creative. It's fun. It's going to be another thing you're going to add to your repertoire that you're going to end up saying, okay, where is the tease here? And you have fun with it. And when you do a good one, there'll be a smile on your face, believe me, and there's a smile on the face of the person that's receiving it. It's not a negative thing. It's, wow, that was creative. That was pretty good. The goal is to grab the attention quickly and keep the listener from turning out and shutting it off. You've seen and heard teases 1,000 times. They are simple to write. And the key ingredients to remember when writing notes for your podcast, what are you going to use to end up teasing? Your goal is the goal to keep your audience, keep them hanging in. Know which stories to tease is important. And to hear me doing this podcast every single week, you hear what I'm driving it to. I'm doing this so that you can learn as we go along. A news program might have 20 stories in its newscast, but you on your podcast might have just one subject. But you may be talking about the next big thing. What is the next big thing? We're going to find out that in just 1 minute.
If you're in the area of Boston North into southern New Hampshire and you're thinking about doing a podcast, there is a place you have to see. It's called Studio 21 Podcast Café. Located right over the border into Salem, New Hampshire, Studio 21 Podcast Café is a live, working, full-service podcast and vodcast, that's video on demand, studio. All professional equipment, professional producer, and total distribution of your podcast is done for you. Would you like search engine optimization for more people to find your business or better ranking on Google? Well, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe can do it all for you for far less than you think. Schedule a free 21-minute no-obligation consultation by going to www.studio21podcast.cafe. That's studio21podcast.cafe. Now, back to the program.
And we're back, and we're talking about teasing, bringing you back. So I told you the next big thing was coming up right after this break, and the break was only a minute long. Did you stay on to hear the next big thing? If you did, the tease worked. It brought you to hang on to it. What is the big thing coming up? I'm going to wait a little bit before I end up telling you that. I got you back in. Now I'm going to hang on a little bit.
You know, I think another point is not all podcasts have advertisements. It doesn't mean that you can't tease, right?
Right.
At the beginning, you want to tease something that's coming later in the podcast.
That's right. So here it is so I just said the next big thing is coming up. Here we are coming back after the tease, and I'm not telling you now the next big thing is coming up later on. And, you know, the show is only 21 minutes or less, so it's coming up
relatively soon, I hope.
And I'm pulling back the curtain. I'm showing you, but I wouldn't be saying this. I'm going to hold on and tell you before I tell you, but I'm telling you. So without teasing, the lazy approach would be for somebody's podcast, a local podcast, talking about local stories, including a boring city council meeting, saying it like this. The city council met tonight to discuss the problems of potholes on some local streets. We'll have that report from the city hall coming up. Am I going to turn into that? I don't know. But instead, saying potholes in your city are eating up cars and tax dollars. That report coming up in just 1 minute.
All right. Now I'm interested.
Okay.
My car is in jeopardy, as is my wallet.
Correct. Now you can feel the pain, right? So now you're all of a sudden interested. It's the same story. It's just said a different way. And if you can add that stuff in, you can gain some momentum on your show. Common mistakes when tease writing is there are all sorts of sins when it comes to tease writing. Some podcasters don't want to do it. They're ashamed to do it. Don't be ashamed. Start small. Get them in there and see what you do. I think you're going to have fun with it. Some even pump up their chest and call their podcast teaser-free. They don't want to use it, and they think it's wrong to end up using it. The penalty for that is the wasted opportunity to grow your podcast. So you want to pump your chest up and say you're not doing it. Okay. Yep. I think you're losing out, and there is a penalty to that, and that's going to be you're not going to grow. You think people hate it. I disagree. I think you can have a lot of fun with it. The first common mistake is to ignore any sort of listener benefit. The legislature met today to talk about taxes. We'll have more, far better. I'm lost here. We'll have more. Far better would be, okay. So the legislature met today to talk about taxes. Is that interesting? Okay. Find out which legislator wants to raise your taxes and by how much. That's better.
Right.
Now you're interested because, again, there's the pain you're talking about, right?
And I think if it's a particular legislator, then you're making it human and personal rather than, this anonymous legislature.
But the tease is we haven't told you yet, but that's what's coming up. Yep. And you almost made him mystical or like the news isn't already out there. But the guy ended up saying what it was right away. Right. But you're saying the person that's listening to your newscast or listening to your podcast doesn't know what that is there, and you put some little mystery behind it, right? That's what a tease is, a little bit of mystery. Another mistake is to include meaningless words or phrases which dilute the pitch you're trying to make. We'll have that story. We'll have more details ahead. Obviously, the story is ahead. You don't need to end up doing that. Another mistake is to write a tease that doesn't pass the so what test. Doctors have new information about vitamin C. So what? Yeah. It's not good enough, I don't think. Tell the viewers that they should care instead of allowing them to say, so what? Doctors have new information about vitamin C and why getting too much of it can be bad for your health. Now, maybe there's something there.
Yep.
Vitamin C could be bad for your health?
No one told me this. I need to find out.
People want to know whether a glass of orange juice may be hurting them. It's vitamin C, right? So maybe you could say that glass of orange juice could be killing you. We'll find out something that. Teasing works. Don't be afraid of it. Try to use it. Have fun with it. It gets addictive, to be honest with you. I like it, and I want to insert it all the time when I'm doing this show. What is the line that I'm going to put in before I go to that break that we have on every single show? And I try to have a little fun with it and come up with something. And when it's better than last week's, I have some fun with it. I like it.
And I think a point is people are listening because they like your show. right? They're not going to, just because you put a tease out there, turn it off.
They're not going to. I don't think it's going to turn anybody off, but I think it is going to bring somebody
exactly.
somebody back.
I think there's no real downside, but the upside is quite big with it.
On our other show, I've heard people say that they get to their destination, and the car is parked, and they're ready to go into where they're going to go, and the engine's running, the car's in park, and they're waiting. They're still hanging on.
Right.
If you can pull that off, man, you're great. You're a great podcaster. If you can somebody's going to be late for their meeting because they're still listening. They could hit pause and go right back to it. And I've said that to people that say that and say, yeah, I end up getting there and I end up saying, oh, let me hear the rest of this.
Right.
You could hit pause and go to it later, but it's like a great book that you couldn't put it down.
And see, I've had to make myself disciplined, or I'd be sitting in my car all day listening to podcasts.
Right.
And the beauty of the podcast is it's not live.
Yes.
Right? It used to be, okay, if you're listening to the radio, if you don't stay there and hear it, you can never hear it.
But we can't see it. If it ends up happening, we have to base it on somebody coming to us and telling us that story. But how great is that the guy gets to where he's supposed to be and he stays in the car to listen to the next segment. He didn't even hit pause. So we engaged them in some sort of way that they wanted to hear the rest of this. That's the magic, actually, also of the short podcast.
Right.
That this is going to be 21 minutes or less. If there's something here, you've arrived where you're supposed to be right now, there's only a couple of minutes left.
That's a great point, because if it's a 1 hour podcast and there's
pause.
40 minutes left,
Yeah.
it's just not possible.
Yeah.
You're going to have to go to work.
And I want to say that this podcast is not put together to get lots of listeners on the podcast. This podcast is different than the other ones. I have the thing that I'm trying to pull off here is to get people to come to the studio. That's the whole goal of it. We talk to podcasters all the time. What's your ultimate goal? Our ultimate goal is to get you to come to this podcast studio to see it, and then for us to sign you up for a weekly podcast every single week to monetize and get money from every single podcast you do. That's the goal. We're pulling the curtain back here on this thing. That is the goal. Other shows are different motivators. That we want to have advertisers on the show. So in order to have advertisers, we need lots of people listening to the show. So we build up the listenership to get it monetized into lots of advertising. But we're doing 16 different shows here.
Right.
Everybody has their different thing of what they're trying to accomplish. So hopefully some of these things end up helping you, whether you're far away and there's no way you can ever do business with Studio 21 or not, that you have to learn what is the thing you're trying to get there.
And we're business focused. However, some of the home podcasters, all they want out of it is to talk about a subject they love. Right?
Yes.
And that's fine if you're not investing a lot of money in it. You know, you're just at home putting a little bit of money into equipment and your time.
But I say that when we were talking to somebody about a podcast just yesterday, how do we measure our success? And one way is money. And getting lots of advertisers and making lots of money is a good way to judge how your podcast is doing. Another way is listeners.
And I think a lot of people are too fixated on the listener number, right? I need gigantic number of listeners to make any money. Well, we know that's not true.
Yeah.
Just based on our own experience.
Absolutely. It's going to be who's listening and what's your reason for being.
If it's a niche audience, then anybody who wants to sponsor it, your audience is so much more valuable than a giant generic audience, right?
Yeah.
So you can get more money from sponsors that are in the same space. So I think, people who are looking at, okay, I need 1 million downloads so that I can get, $20 per 1,000. It still doesn't add up to what you can do if you think about it a little more.
Right, and sell the advertising yourself. Find the key person that's doing it. So back to the teasing thing. I want you to remember this, and we briefly got to it. Don't overpromise and underdeliver on your tease. If your story is a must-see, incredible, unbelievable, never before, heard before, money-saving, life-changing tip, make sure you deliver it. If you're saying it's all that, you have to make sure you deliver that when you end up doing the tease, or else you're going to cry wolf one time too many, and they're not going to believe the tease as they're coming up. You heard at Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, we deliver a clean, professional podcast studio with state-of-the-art equipment, a professional engineer and producer, and we make it so it sounds good and you look good. That's what we're here for. Are you too busy to do a podcast yourself? We can help. We'd love to work with you. Contact me at dave@studio21podcast.cafe. That's Dave at studio, the number 21 podcast.cafe. Schedule a free 21-minute meeting with me. Let me show you the studio, and we'll talk about your thoughts and plans, and I'll even buy you a cup of coffee. So that's it. Next week, we're going to blow your mind, and it might get you to stop doing your podcast, because most every person is stopping doing their podcasting now. Yes, that's a tease, but it's true. Tune in next week and you'll find out what that's all about. That's my 21 minutes or less, and we're out of here. You've been listening to the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, live from the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe on the United Podcast Network.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.